Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Together We Can Help. Today is the fourth episode. My name is Akul Babare. I'm an incoming freshman at SMU, and I'm going to be studying finance this fall. So I'd like to introduce my next guest. His name is Samson Williams, and he was my professor at Columbia this last summer where I was studying AI, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. And I will let him introduce himself really quickly. Samson?
Awesome. Cool. I'm super happy to see that you're doing your thing, being entrepreneurial, because 90% of success is showing up. That last 10% is actually taking an idea, making a decision, and then executing. Because there's a lot of difference between making a decision and taking action. And I just love the fact that you're taking action. And so I want to give you props for that. My name is Samson Williams. As Akul mentioned, I teach at the University of, I do teach at the University of New Hampshire School of Law School, but I know Akul from the summer program for blockchain, fintech, AI, and beyond at Columbia University in the state of New York in New York City. When I'm not doing that, I'm just being a raconteur of common sense, causing all kinds of problems. And Akul's gonna ask me some really hard questions, and I'm super excited because the last time I saw him, he had this platinum blonde lock of hair summer, but now he's looking all professional with his tie and brown hair.
Yeah. So, Samson, my first question is: do you think the $6 trillion stimulus bill was needed? And if not, what do you think could have been done in the other way?
Was it needed? I love this question. Akul asked him, he was going to tell me the question. I was like, no, just ask them to me. Was it needed? Ideologically, yes, it was needed. Because right now, the division in the US between the haves and the have-nots and the way we've structured our system, we needed to bail out the banks. Our bailout, not necessarily the banks in this instance, but bail out industry. And so it was needed in that sense. It actually brings us closer to Bernie Sanders' wet dream of having universal basic income, Medicare for all. So Bernie lost in the elections, or lost in the race, but he's gonna win big because now that we've introduced, hey, everybody should be getting, right now, the way unemployment works, everybody's getting roughly a $50,000 a year salary to stay home. And it's gonna be really hard to claw back that entitlement. So was it needed? Absolutely. Was there another choice? Sometimes in order to make cake, you gotta break a few eggs. So the alternative was, one, don't close up shop, let people out. Yes, we'll have some people who die, it's very tragic, but those were preventable public health deaths, but we had to respond faster and more aggressive. We didn't do that. So what is the other option? We're about to experience what it's like to go through a depression that happened over a 1-month period versus having your typical quarter, recession, then a depression. So the only other option was to let it play out. And I think that we'll be getting back to America, or getting back to work here in America. And then it's going to be interesting to see the difference between haves and the have-nots and how that plays out in real time.
So I want to talk about that a little bit. Do you think instead of how much money they spent to the stimulus bill, what if they just didn't collect income tax throughout the country this year?
That's actually a worse idea, because part of the, Akul and I were having a WhatsApp conversation, and can I curse on this show? Because he's FUBAR, his future is FUBAR, because we created $6 trillion out of thin air with no mechanism for paying that back. And so it's really not hey, let's not collect any income taxes. That's such a bad idea. How do you pay for schools, buses, public infrastructure, that pesky healthcare entitlement, that Medicaid or that healthcare system for all? How do you pay for that without taxes? So the real question is, Akul, how is your generation in 15 years, when everyone voted for this $6 billion all dead, what's your generation's plan for paying for this? You should be around, what are you, almost 18 now? You're gonna be 32 years old. What's your plan? Go.
See, that's a really tough one. Me personally, I am economically conservative, and I don't really like people coming in trying to take my business. I believe enterprise should be mostly free, should be able to, under constraints, true entrepreneurs can't really thrive, in my opinion. So I want people, I don't like how much money we spent. As you said, it was needed, but I think we're going to have to really, taxes are going to be high for my generation. I already know it. My tax percentage is probably going to be, hopefully if I'm in the top 1%, I'll be paying 45% taxes rather than 37 right now. And
I think you're actually going to go up a little bit higher. I love, last year I went for Global Entrepreneurship Week with the State Department. And what is this gentleman's name who runs the State Department at the moment? I forget his name, it's going to come to me. So I happened to be in the very front row when he started talking in The Hague in Holland. And so I love The Hague because they have sidewalks, bike paths, than the roadway.
mm-hmm.
But in order to have sidewalks, bike path, and roadway, you have to tax people for that. So they do pay 50 to 60% in taxes. But you see this in the quality of life. And so when we're operating in a system where we don't have a social safety net, we're not taxing for that, it's impossible for businesses to thrive if every decade we end up here. Because this is the second time in my lifetime I've been through a once in a lifetime event, and I'm not even 40. And for you, now that you're 18, you're going to remember this. And in a decade, you're going to be like, do I want to go through this same thing again? Because I was the emergency manager at Fannie Mae from 2008 to 2016 when they were when they almost inadvertently ruined the world the first time. And so now, a decade later, we're right back at the same spot because we've never invested in that social safety net. And so you can either have extreme wealth and nothing else, or a balance. And so we're fighting the balance because American exceptionalism says me and Akul can be exceptional. The rest of y'all are just going to be poor. And that ideology has got to change. And that's the real struggle, and particularly for your generation, because the old people who built the system are going to be dead in a decade.
Yeah. So talking about the big corporations and mass wealth and then poverty all over, do you think just like the big corporations were bailed out back in 2008, do you think the big corporations like Boeing, American Airlines, United, all these big airline corporations should have been bailed out today, up like how they were this year?
Bleep, 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 no. Because if you believe in the free market says you should fail if you're not resilient. If you've been mismanaging your books, you don't have liquidity enough to support your operations, you deserve to go. We should let all of the big agencies go into bankruptcy. They will get restructured. What that will mean is executives will make less bonuses. The employees have a chance of actually preserving their pensions.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, that's not how we operate here in America. And that's really unfortunate. And so if you're a large organization, you deserve to fail. Why? Free market. If the market deems you're not worthy, you're done. If you're a sophisticated or accredited investor and you want to bail out, no. If you're that sophisticated, you knew the risk, you should have had higher requirements on your board and your managers to ensure that that entity's risk were spread appropriately. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, if your business model relies that every 10 years or so, every decade or so, you have to get bailed out by taxpayers, by so-called unsophisticated or unaccredited investors, then let's not give them a loan. Let's not give them a bailout. Let's do equity investments. It's Shark Tank, baby, where every taxpayer, Akul, you in particular, is, hey, if the taxpayers put in 10 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion, 60 billion, in 2009, taxpayers gave General Motors $60 billion. What did we get in exchange for that? How much equity do we own? How many Class A shares? How many super shares do we own? If your business wants to get bailed out, either A, it needs to be nationalized, because that's why you're coming and asking for taxpayer money, or B, we need to let the free market let you go through bankruptcy and either die or emerge stronger.
So what you're saying is, like, whenever I say, let's use the example of Boeing, right? Boeing goes into bankruptcy, and then you said the taxpayers. So after I give them money, like they do kind of like crowdfunding through the United States taxpayers to buy equity from the company. So in the future, like if I gave them $100,000, I would have, let's say, $100,000 worth of equity inside of Boeing.
Oh, cool. That sounds fair, doesn't it?
That sounds amazing. Why don't we do that right now?
I have no idea, man. Why don't we do that right now? Because I love that you brought up crowdfunding. I'm going to put on my Crowdfunding Professionals Association hat, cfpa.org. I got elected the president of the Crowdfunding Professionals Association this year. Right when
Congratulations.
we entered a recession, going into a depression. And here's what you need to know about Jobs Act, Jumpstart Our Businesses and Startups Act. It was passed in 2012, came into law May 16, 2016, by the dude named President Obama. And it's all about small business funding, and it's all about crowdfunding. So how crowdfunding works is, if you've ever been to church, synagogue, you've probably been involved in donation crowdfunding.
Mm-hmm.
They pass a hat, everybody puts money in the hat. That's donation crowdfunding. It works brilliantly. You don't get anything back in return other than, hey, you supported this institution. Then there's rewards crowdfunding, where they do this a lot for video games and t-shirts, where you can pre-buy a game or access or a good, and that's called reward crowdfunding, because you pre-buy a good service, you pre-buy this pin, you get this pin later when it's launched. Mm-hmm. Then there's this other thing called debt crowdfunding, and debt crowdfunding is what Wall Street does every decade to Main Street. They say, hey, we've ran horrible business models. We know this because we're back again because we're going bankrupt. We want to crowdfund a bailout from taxpayers. Taxpayers don't get a term sheet. They don't get any shares. They have no voting rights. They don't get a determination of what this money is spent on. But these large institutions say, we're too big to fail. We're going to crowdfund from the American people. The difference is they're doing donation crowdfunding. The American people, they're not making a loan. They're not getting a term sheet. They don't get anything. And particularly for your generation, the question is, why every decade or so are we bailing out big business? When I say we, I mean taxpayers. I mean everyday people. And so the next part of crowdfunding is equity crowdfunding. And equity crowdfunding works just like Shark Tank. Akul gets to be Mr. Wonderful because he's got on his tie and he's looking wonderful. I get to be Mark Cuban. Shout out to the Dallas Mavericks. And so Boeing says, hey, I need $50 billion. And the taxpayers say, okay, that's great. We need X amount of super shares. Mm-hmm. That's it. Now we own your company. Yeah. Is that called nationalizing your company? Absolutely. When the taxpayers own your business, that's called nationalizing your company. Because if your company has been so poorly mismanaged that it's in a position to be nationalized, that's the fate you deserve. You should go to your board and your executives and say, why did you put us in this position? And I think your generation particularly has a really big chance of saying, here's how we're going to modernize the way we do bailouts. We're just going to do equity crowdfunding.
That's really interesting. I really like that idea, though. Like, if I have the ability to buy into these companies whenever they need it the most, and because I know if they have the funding, they can run profits somehow with good management, I think it'd be good for the American people. And wouldn't that create this second form of income too, diversifying the American people's assets at the same time?
Absolutely. And the difference is, and I said this earlier when I made a video for the Crowdfunding Professionals Association, customers have more money than investors. Mm-hmm. You get an investor to give you $10 million, you're going to spend 60% of that $10 million on a thing called customer acquisition costs, marketing, advertising, building your brand. Mm-hmm. The other bit of it goes to building your product and eventually going to sales. And so when you get $10 million from an investor, you spend it trying to get customers. Customers have more money than investors because ultimately it's your investors that help you pay back your customers. I'm sorry, it's your customers that help you pay back your investors. Mm-hmm. Because investors only give you money, they don't buy your good product or service. They're just giving you money and saying, hey, go give us a 100x return. So here's where crowdfunding works so brilliantly. You take your customers and you say, I sell pins. Do you want to invest in my pin company? Your customers say, yes, I want to put $1,000 into your pin company. Not only are they now your investors, your customers, they also use your pins. Because again, if you run a pin company and you get $10 million from one investor, they're not using $10 million worth of pins. You get $1,000 from one investor and they turn around and use your product, your good service or product. One, they're never going to use another type of pin. This is an in gel, right? They're only going to use this type of pin. Don't show up with no big pin to my party. Why? I don't own interest in this. And so when we think about this, customers have more money than investors. I don't care if you're a private equity firm, you're a VC, you're an angel. Customers help small businesses, startups pay back these guys their investment. Get rid of that middleman, connect directly with your customers as a small business. So you have small business customers and they come together. So yeah, your customers fund your businesses. That's equity crowdfunding. When we talk about bailouts, if you're a corporation and you put yourself on the precipice of financial ruin through mismanagement because your board and your executives have these huge, ginormous bonuses, you deserve to go under. Do not go ask unsophisticated, unaccredited investors for a bailout every decade. That doesn't mean you're great at running a business. It just means that, hey, you can build a bubble and you're trying to wait until it's this big before it pops to exit. It's actually not a sound business property. That's not how you make America great. Because if your only goal is to build something up and exit before it pops, it puts us all at risk. Here we are again, for the second time in my lifetime, going through a once in a lifetime event of having to bail out the economy. And cool, your generation, your generation has the biggest chance to change this pattern.
So I wanted to, this summer I learned a lot about cryptocurrency from you, not just cryptocurrency, but also blockchain and AI. So how do you think cryptocurrency could have been implemented into the $1,200 stimulus package that was given to most Americans?
First off, where's my phone case at? I don't know. Can you see this? Do I need blockchain?
Yeah,
no. Right? So we didn't actually need crypto for this stimulus check. First thing about the $1,200, that's your money. You lent yourself money because you're going to have to pay that back in taxes. How that's going to happen, I don't know. So they're not giving you anything. That is literally your money. Cool. That is your money. That is all the viewers' money. Don't say thank you because I'm giving you your money back. The question is, how could we have improved the distribution of funds? We have an archaic system. It took them so long to figure out, hey, we should engage these fintechs, PayPal, Square, Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, to distribution. And particularly for folks of my complexion, so many Black and brown folks, they weren't able to get funds because banks said, if you're not an existing company, we're not going to review your eligibility, not only for the $1,200, but also I'm talking about the Payroll Protection Program, the PPP program. So on one hand, you have the IRS saying, hey, if you didn't pay taxes digitally last year or electronically last year, we'll cut you a check. It'll get there in 6 months or longer when you need money now to pay your rent. Is that helpful? No. On the business side of things, all these small businesses did not get funding because the way subsidiaries works, was it Jimmy John's? It was some franchise who, through their subsidies, they were able to get $10 million to cover their payroll. So I think it was 1.9 million business entities applied, and they drained $349 billion as of April 16th when the Payroll Protection Program ran out of money.
Yeah.
And still, there's millions of other small businesses who couldn't even apply. So you're not looking for a blockchain solution. You're looking for a run-of-the-mill fintech solution to ease the pain, to ease the friction between the federal government, the Treasury, who's just printing money out of thin air, and Main Street. How do you make that happen? So many other solutions that could have been used. What we'll see in the future, hopefully, knock on wood, is a blockchain-based solution that brings that level of transparency we want between how much money was printed and who got it. Because if you use blockchain, you can actually do that. The Federal Reserve says, abracadabra, we have $6 trillion more, and then it's who got it. We can see where each of these transactions went to. We've alleviated the middlemen who are the banks. Will there be fraud, waste, and abuse? Absolutely. And the $6 trillion that went out, you should easily anticipate we lost $1 trillion just to fraud, waste, and abuse. Why? They sent out 14 years worth of small business loans in 2 weeks. It's some crazy number like that. Why? There's a sense of urgency. So all that to say is we don't need a blockchain solution to distributing funds in this instance. We just need to improve our existing fintech solutions.
So going back to the the Payroll Protection Program or Paychecks Protection Program, basically, I read this other day, and my parents, we technically have a small business with our healthcare practices. And I was going through our numbers and I'm seeing, okay, well, luckily we got this money, but we have some other companies that haven't got their money. I have some friends, some people that have helped that haven't got their money yet. They're still waiting in the queue, and comes to find out that, as you said, we're about to run out of the money that the government provided for us. So what does the government do? Do they add more money to the stimulus package, or do we just sit there and say, okay, the small business that didn't get the money, you guys just have to deal with it?
Small businesses are screwed. I mean, we can let's print another $2 trillion worth of debt so Cool and your generation can figure out how to pay for it. That's option number one. Option number two, we just say, hey, everybody's screwed. So part of it, when we go through large institutional changes, one is right now the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, we're really testing the faith of people in the US dollar. Because when you start printing with no way of paying for it, what good does that do to you? There was a joke going on Twitter that the folks in Africa wish they had the same printing machine the US government did. Because if you're just going to print money and not back it up by anything, gold, silver, tangible assets, well, then you're just printing money.
Yeah,
and so the reason that the US can print money is because we have the United States Marine Corps and a large standing army, and we will impose democracy upon you through shock and awe at any given moment. That's why our money has value. That's why the US dollar has value. Whereas everyone else is like, oh, we don't have this army, so we can't impose our will upon you. So the real question is, when we talk about blockchain and cryptocurrencies, because I have a prediction that Amazon is going to roll out their own type of token where you can use the Amazon token to buy anything in the Amazon ecosystem. And you have to remember, it's not only Amazon, it's the companies Amazon owns, like Audible, Whole Foods, Zappos, etc. Amazon owns like a dozen other billion-dollar companies. So Amazon will introduce its own, we're going to call it rewards points as opposed to currency, where you can use these rewards points to fund anything in the Amazon ecosystem. And so in addition to Amazon, you'll see some of the states like Washington, Oregon, and California, New York, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey. I think Texas, Oklahoma, and like 6 or 4 other states around them, they're forming these different state consortiums for responding to the coronavirus issues. They're going to turn around and issue their own type of state currency. They're going to take a municipal bond for the west coast of California, California, Washington, Oregon. They're going to create a municipal bond and issue tokens off of those. And those tokens are going to operate as currencies along the West Coast. Can that be done right now? Absolutely. Does it require blockchain infrastructure? Absolutely. Is that what currency will look like in the future? You damn skippy.
So you're saying that the United States dollar, that green dollar that we get in our wallets, is going to be completely obsolete because these different, let's call them coalitions of states, are going to create their own type of state currency. So like I'm going to see a Texas token when I'm going to Buc-ee's to go buy something on the way to drive to Austin.
I'm saying that when currency becomes a matter of faith, it opens up the field. Because right now, you believe the US dollar is worth something, hence it has value. But again, we're probably going to print another $4 trillion worth of fiat money, US dollar, out of thin air. Why? Because we need it. Meanwhile, when these different state consortiums, they will have the ability to say, hey, we're going to have an internal ledger system amongst the states. The Texas token is accepted in Texas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, Louisiana. If you touch the border of Texas, we'll accept the Texas token. Now you have a dual system of internal credits. We're not going to call it currency because Uncle Sam would have a fit. We're saying, yeah, we accept Texas tokens for all these other goods and services. Because what people don't realize is that money, number one, money's been digital since 1950 when the Diners Club credit card first came out. Because this thing right here, this magic debit card, right? You don't get cash. We've been digital for 70 years. Mm-hmm. This is where money's at. It's all digital. And so you're not actually dealing with in paper, you're dealing in ones and zeros. And when you're dealing in ones and zeros, it just means you're dealing with accounting software to track those ones and zeros. If people don't have faith in Uncle Sam's ledger and Uncle Sam's accounting system, let me tell you, Amazon has amazing customer service. When they roll out their Amazon token, people are going to start using that for transactions on any place that you can use Amazon, anything that Amazon sells, which includes the other billion-dollar companies. When the state of Texas says, hey, you can start earning Texas tokens for your work and paying for your goods, services, and taxes, now all of a sudden, Uncle Sam and their digital token, called the US dollar, has to compete with another digital token called the Texas token. And this is where things get exciting, because now we come down to an 11th Amendment battle over states' rights.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit more about small businesses, and how do you think small businesses adapt to the situation? For example, restaurants are rolling out more takeout ability. Different companies are starting, like different distilleries I've seen are starting to switch over to making hand sanitizer. Different like shoe companies like New Balance has started, they're not a small business obviously, but they started making N95 masks. What do you recommend for small business to do in this situation?
Be ready to pivot. That's first and foremost. Be ready to pivot. Be brave. Be ready to pivot. Be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and then be brave. Being ready to pivot means you might have been New Balance before making shoes. Now you're making masks or gowns or something else. A mother of necessity requires you to pivot. When you do pivot, be flexible. There's going to be a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, because circumstances are going to require you to do things you've never done before. Cool, you've already pivoted. You said, hey, I'm going to go to university. Let me just start a talk show. Boom. You got out your video, you figured out your Zoom background, and you started doing, right? A year from now, when you have 10 million followers and viewers, and people are like, oh, how did you become so successful? You're going to say, I recognize I needed to pivot. I became flexible with fear, uncertainty, doubt, and ambiguity. And then I did it because I was brave. And being brave just means, yeah, some people will judge you. Some people are like, oh, you're not an expert at this. Give yourself time, you will be an expert. So when it comes to small business, you do need to be ready to pivot. You do need to be flexible and embracing the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. These uncertain times make you have to do things you've never done before. This is where it's required for you to be brave. Because if someone had all the answers, we wouldn't be here. And I'm going to take a stab at economists, the biggest charlatans in the world, because if economists knew anything about economics, either A, they would short the market and be the richest people on the planet, or B, they are directly responsible for the recessions and depressions we experience.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the depression, right? So we're coming in. This time is, in my opinion, is going to be called the depression of Corona in history books written down the line when my kids are studying U.S. history in the 11th grade. So my question is, what are we supposed to expect? What kind of timeline? For you travel all around the world. I remember you told me a statistic. How much time did you spend in the air last year?
I spent 23 days in the air. So I was airplane for 23 days.
So someone like you who's traveling for 23 days out of 365 days of the year, how do you think consultants, different workers who are traveling for going to different cities for business, do you think they're going to be able to go back to normal? Do you think we're going to be able to continue on business, or we're going to have to get used to the new normal where everything is going to be done remotely?
I think the new normal is digital, and I think a lot of people will struggle with this because it's not a technology challenge, right? You're a digital native. If I tell you get on Zoom, Teams, or any of these other platforms, you can figure it out. Where if I tell someone older who's never used this technology before, it's like, how does this work? I kid you not. I had to hold my breath and walk my mom through Google Docs. She'd never used it before. And I was like, oh my God, this woman, she's 70 years old. And so I have to remind myself to be patient because she's never seen this platform before. She's never had to use it. And so there will be a lot of organizational change and cultural change as the older generation is all of a sudden thrust into this digital environment where the social cues, the etiquette for how you interact, what is appropriate, Do you get dressed up to go on Zoom? Me, I threw on a jacket because otherwise I just got a Florida State dry fit shirt on. And so what are all those little social cues and etiquette and cultural cues in the digital environment? So we're going to see that transition. Eventually, when you have kids, this is going to be normal. It's going to be as normal as us having this conversation where they know that they will talk over Zoom for a variety of things. Right now, we're transitioning into a new normal. And in that transition, this is where the fear, uncertainty, and doubt comes in. This is not the tech. We never have tech problems. The tech works, right? Zoom works. Occasionally there are bugs, but it works. We've demonstrated over the last month and a half that there is never a reason for a cool to be in the office for many jobs. There are some essential worker jobs, and it's so funny, we call them essential workers, but none of them make a living wage. There are some essential worker jobs where you have to show up in person. But for other white collar jobs, for other high paying jobs, they can be done remotely. So we're gonna make that transition. We're gonna come out of this coronavirus, this COVID-19 pandemic, and we're gonna say, one, you used to have to live where you work, but now you can work from anywhere. So where do you want to live? Me, I might move to Texas. Why? Super cheap. I can still make my DC salary. For me, that makes sense. I might even have kids because right now in DC, daycare costs $2,500 a month for daycare for one kid. Whereas daycare in Texas is super inexpensive. And so we're going to see just huge cultural transformations. If we liken it back to September 11th, when so many firms moved out of New York after the towers got fell, they just moved their operations for resiliency purposes. Now people are going to be thinking, I need more space. I don't like living in these high pandemic areas. I'm moving to Midland, Texas, or Odessa. Cost of living is much cheaper. So we'll continue to evolve. People are going to hate this level of change because humans love revolution. They hate change. For yourself, your generation is going to define the new normal, because these older people, they're getting taken out of the game. They're retiring. They're going to just die in place in their federal jobs. It's really going to be up to your generation to define, what do you want your new normal to be? And it's going to be exciting. It is going to be digital, but there will still be a place for human to human contact and human to human relations, because at the end of the day, we're giant hairless apes. We love to hug, we love to touch, we love to shake hands, we love to engage in cultural ceremonies that make no sense. So when I'm in India, I was in India visiting some folks in Chennai, and so I forget what you call it, but out of a sign of respect, you get down on your hands and knees, you bow, and you put your hands forward, and you touch their feet.
Yeah, namaskar.
I don't know, what is it called?
So from Pune area where I'm from, it's called like a namaskar, where like I'll go and touch my elders' feet as a sign of respect.
Yes. So when I'm in India, I'm gonna namaskara. Even though I don't know what you call that, I know it's culturally appropriate to do that in many instances. And so I'm respecting the customs of the land I happen to be a tourist in. And so we will still have those customs. They might modify a bit, but humans, we love tradition. We love cultural customs, because at the end of the day, that's what makes us unique. And people, particularly cultural groups, we want to remain unique. And I think we need to. Otherwise, we just have this homogeneous, bland, we've all been colonized and speak English and eat Burger King. That sounds horrible.
So I actually had this conversation with my dad, and I was talking about our company specifically, and I said, okay, after we've seen this time where like most of the work in the healthcare system has shifted over to remote, not just, obviously doctors and nurses are inside the hospital still, but there's practices such as telemedicine and telehealth, which are your doctors are seeing patients by just FaceTiming or Zooming just like this with the patient's consent, obviously, and saying, hey, how are you feeling? Asking the same questions that I would ask you if I was sitting right next to you in the clinic, but instead I'm FaceTiming you and I'm asking you these same questions, and it counts just as a clinic. So what about all the people in the back office? I was asking my dad, I was like, why can't we shift them all over remote and imagine how much money these companies are going to save on rent costs, mortgage costs on these office buildings that they're buying, when most of the work that their employees can be doing is done from home already right now. So do you think there's going to be a massive shift in, like, for example, consultants for my dad, like let's say software consultants? obviously they have to go to the client's office, but do you think clients are going to shift over and say, oh, never mind, let us do you should do your work remotely. We don't want you to come to the office anymore. Do you think you're going to see that shift?
I think we're going to see a shift in automation because I'm a very expensive 1099 mercenary. And so, one, if you can automate some of the processes that I bring, some of that wisdom and technical know-how, you should do it because otherwise I'm super expensive. And so what you'll see under the guise of social distancing and public health, particularly in the manufacturing sector, if you used to employ 1,000 people and before you couldn't politically fire them all to automate your systems, it's called straight through processing or straight through manufacturing. Now you can say, hey, we want to open up our factory again. In order to do that, we need to retool. And yes, our workforce is going to be reduced from 1,000 or so people to 500. And of that 500, 250 are going to be part-time. In good economic times, politically, you can't do that. In these current times, absolutely. So you'll see a lot of companies that reopen, and they're going to look at all of the automation projects that before they politically couldn't do, but now they have the perfect excuse, because when you automate someone's job, it increases the productivity, it increases the profit margin of the company. Meanwhile, that person is just unemployed. And your generation in particular is going to have to figure this out. I wrote a paper somewhere about taxing robotic automation, because when you fire a person, when that job is lost due to automation, now they become a ward of the state, a liability of the state. Because if you're in Odessa, Texas, or if you're in Waller, Texas, where I'm from, or Cyprus or anywhere, how does the local community replace the lost revenue and taxes from that person? And they lost that revenue to a machine. People are always worried about illegal, undocumented immigrants and aliens. They need to be worried about robotic process automation. So first and foremost, you're going to see so many things that are automated. That's the first thing. And those automations are going to occur amongst white collar folks like myself who are consultants, because it's just cheaper to automate your systems because it gives you more data insights, more situational awareness, all the business analytics you need. When you have them automated, then you can collect the data, then you can do the data analytics, then you can engage in big data, then you can figure out your profit loss margins better. When you have manual processes, it gets a little difficult. So absolutely, white collar jobs are the first to go in automation. At the very end of that spectrum are the blue collar, the hardworking jobs where people are picking fruits, they're doing construction work, even construction is being automation. So what we're looking at in this generation, in this decade rather, is how many good paying middle class jobs are lost to automation? Then what do we do with this useless class? There's a gentleman who wrote a book, I forget the name of the gentleman. It's called The Rise of Robots. And it introduces the concept of the useless class, meaning they're humans who are capable, they're skilled, but when we automate those positions, what do we do with them? And so this is where we're on that precipice. We're under the guise of social distancing and public health. We're going to automate so many things, starting off with myself, first and foremost, all these high paid consultants who run around and do things, because automation followed by offshoring. Because when you can work remotely, why are you paying me in US dollars? You can get the same skill sets, you can get the better education from someone living overseas. They won't have cultural insights, they won't have my chutzpah, my charisma, my charm, my drive, my hustle, which is my differentiator, but they will be technical expertise and they cost 90% less.
So let's take it, going on that note, how about India? India is in the middle of a lockdown. I know my family is in their home. Like my grandma, she's actually in Pune right now. How do you think India comes out of the situation?
That's a good question. I don't know how you take the largest democracy, 1.2, 1.3 billion people, and particularly with so many people living in poverty, living on less than $2.50 a day, and stop their incomes for 30 days. I don't know what that looks like, particularly given we were talking about there was an article about contact tracing. It's on the epidemiology side where you're looking for who did this person come in contact with from COVID-19. And they were specifically talking about a Muslim convention where a lot of people who were Muslim, they met together, and then out of that, there was so many people who contacted COVID-19. But in the dynamics of Muslim and Hindu relationships, there was that blowback in the Hindu community, because the Muslims are the minority in that area, where they were beating up and trying to track down Muslims for the purpose of beating them up. So there's so many cultural nuances that have to be, I call them cultural nuances, but they're really historical pain points that go back to Pakistan, West Pakistan, India, the 1950s, when they had their revolutions. And so that's really going to be the determining factor in how does India come out of this. Because I think India is a powerhouse, second only to the continent of Africa. And if we look at Africa, we're talking Nigeria, Tanzania, Ethiopia, Eritrea, for like places where they're booming. So India has all of the technical expertise, it has the resources, and so it's really up to, can they overcome some of their cultural differences to come out on top? Because it's super hard when it's 1.2 or 3 billion people to get everybody aligned. So we're gonna see. I think India is probably in one of the best spaces to be successful, but it's the cultural issues that are really gonna define whether or not India can take all their technical capabilities and be successful.
Well, thank you so much for your help today. Thank you so much for your advice. I'm going to link your website on underneath the video and everything. Anything else you want to add? Where can people find your the webinar that you had about the payroll protection program?
So that webinar exists on the internet, on our website somewhere. It's probably useless because that was like 3 weeks ago. You should stay tuned. I do encourage everyone watching to follow the CFPA.org, that's the Crowdfunding Professionals Association, because the mission of that organization is to, what are the tools, resources, and knowledge small businesses need in order to raise capital, raise startup funding. And remember, if you don't remember anything else, customers have more money than investors, because it is your customers who help you pay off your investors. Get rid of your investors, connect directly with your customers through Jobs Act regulated equity and debt crowdfunding. You don't remember anything else of my ranting, remember that, because for America to be successful, it requires Main Street, it requires small businesses to be resilient, to be viable, to be active. Because all these businesses that are too big to fail, they will come back in a decade and be like, hey, Main Street, give us money again. Let's reduce our dependencies on these too big to fail monolithic companies and focus on how do we help a cool generation and my future kids and grandkids, how do we give them back their individual economic and financial power? And that's through small business investment, that's through entrepreneurship, because without those two things, America just does not function.
Well, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Excellent. Bye-bye.